Okay, we'll try this again now that I've figured out my internet connection. Sorry about that. Sometimes it gets weird with internet connection out here, um, especially when I'm out in my garage. Um, so as I was saying, this is Ian Trevethan. I'm coming at you live from my house instead of the museum, and we are working in my shop because I'm going to work on the dragon. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But before my internet connection went weird on me, I was just sort of showing everybody around sort of where I hang out when I'm not at work. So this is my shop. So just the kinds of things. This is actually part of an outreach teaching cast, or I guess sort of model of. It's supposed to be a shark fossil modeled after our Cretoxyrhina in our exhibit area, but it's actually been damaged, so I'm in the process of repairing that. This is a Halloween costume for some Halloween someday when I get done with that. It's supposed to be Skeletor from He-Man. Of course, all of my armor props, you can see all of the crazy props that I work with, and then in the process, life-size Pikachu. This is meant for our Pokemon Day. We'll have that someday again, hopefully. And sort of my little workspace here. And here is the dragon. So since last time we sort of talked about the eyes, I was touching up all the detail around the eyes. So this is kind of where I landed with that. Little more work that needs to be done, but for the most part, that's a pretty good stopping point. The other thing that I've been working on is sort of doing lips. And you can see there's sort of these red spots. That's actually where the teeth were. And I decided that instead of having the teeth attached, I needed to really unattach my teeth and finish painting up. So that's what I'm going to do, is sort of just touch up the lips, and then we'll work on the next project. And I'm going to do it all one-handed while I hold the camera. So let's just see how multi-talented I can be here. All right, so again with my high-tech palette, going to squirt some raw, what did I decide this was? Raw sienna, because we're doing Bob Ross type stuff and making happy dragons. And I'm just going to sort of touch up. When I first did this, can you imagine these lips? Well, I guess if you watched the last afternoon live feed I did on Friday, you know that these were all bright red, right? So for a while there, my dragon had these bright red lips, and I was just not really convinced that this was going to work. I still don't love it, but I haven't put very much detail on it. However, it's not as awful as a dragon with bright red lips. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just going to touch up the areas where my teeth were, so we don't have red spots anymore. And there we go. Get rid of any evidence of where teeth were. And then I'm going to start sort of weathering like I did the eyes and other details. So what I want to do is, I've got actually three parts here. I've got the upper lip, the lower lip. If you look very carefully, there's actually some gums in there, which the teeth will be working around. So I want to get all of those details sort of worked out. So again, I'm going to add a little bit of black to my mix here. And basically what this is dry brushing. So I sort of brush out my paint with my brush until it's very, light on the brush. There's not a lot of paint sitting on the brush, and then I'm just going to sort of fill in these details so they stand out but are not overpowering. So again, very similar process to what I was doing with the eyes, or with the eyelids. And I'm just going to try to get each of these squares and sort of up and around sort of the top of the lip to sort of blend that in with the skin crevices and things like that. So that's the goal here, is to sort of bring out all of the cool crevices and details of the lips and make it look as lifelike as possible with as low-tech materials as we're using. Eventually, so in case you're just turning in and you haven't seen any of the other live feeds I've done regarding this particular project, what I'm working on is this is actually a display piece or an exhibit piece for a traveling program that was intended for summer and fall of 2020, which of course, due to current world affairs, is indefinitely put on hold because we are not really able to have groups of people together for the good of everybody, because we want anybody to get sick. So right now I'm in a holding pattern. But initially this was an exhibit / traveling program that was designed with the Kansas library system in mind. I can't remember what their summer reading program theme is this summer. Something like create your own story, or tell your own story, or make your own story, imagine your own story, something like that. So what we decided to do was, for our summer traveling education and outreach program / exhibit piece, is from mythology to paleontology. So the idea is we build life-size, as lifelike representations of mythological creatures. So in this case, this is a dragon. This is what I would call a terrestrial dragon. Even though technically this dragon has wings and is able to fly, it's terrestrial because it lives on land, doesn't live in the water, and it would go around and, it's a carnivore, so it would go around and probably steal people's sheep and cows and, whatever their livestock happen to be, small children, dogs. So the idea behind this is we are going to pair mythological creatures with the paleontological and zoological animals that may have inspired or contributed to these mythological creatures sort of being interpreted and imagined by early explorers. So we thought that would be a fun way to sort of highlight both imagination as well as comparative science, and a cool way to look at evolutionary adaptations and novelties that some of these mythological critters might have, compare them to the animals and fossils that might have given rise to what these mythological creatures ended up sort of being interpreted as. So that's the idea behind this exhibit. So this is the first piece in several. We're actually going to do 3 different kinds of dragons. We're going to do the terrestrial dragon, which is this one that I just described. We are going to do a subterranean dragon, which is a very salamander-like bodied dragon that lives in underwater, or actually lives in caves like aquifer systems. So if you imagine underwater rivers and lakes, this is where this animal would hang out. So he wouldn't have colorful skin. He'd be very pale and veiny, and his eyes are not going to be as well developed as this guy. They're going to be very light sensitive. We're imagining sort of these sort of grayish, sort of kind of glowing or reflecting like eyes. So that will be our subterranean dragon. And then our third dragon will be a marine or a sea dragon, which will be sort of very, it'll be very well suited for a marine environment. So the idea is to make 3 of these. And this exhibit is meant to function in 2 different ways. The first way is, as I said, it's intended for libraries and classrooms. So we have one version of this exhibit that is a smaller version that can be set up in a smaller space like a classroom or a library setting where we have these things on display, but it's not quite as big of a setup. We also make use of a video screen and some sort of PowerPoint-like slideshow. And I would actually sort of be up there presenting these things in a very straightforward sort of education program sort of format. The second larger version of this will be for things like, sort of community festivals or conventions, Comic-Cons, things that you might have on the college campus, where we're able to set up in a huge amount of space. And that is actually set up in a 10 by 20 space. So it's like a long tunnel, and it's got a tent covering to it. And we've actually got walls that are made from wire. And these exhibit pieces will be set up on display in a little bit more of a museum exhibit-like manner. So it will depend less on me standing up there and presenting this, and it will actually have text panels. And again, it will have video and probably sound, and dynamic lighting is what I'm hoping for. But, that's all time and money. So the idea there is that literally people can walk through this thing, and my goal is to give them a museum-like experience even though they're not in the museum. In this case, a museum exhibit happens to come wherever the venue might be. So those are my two sort of iterations of this program or outreach program or idea, whatever you want to call it. And it's able to function in a couple of different ways. So I'm really excited about the big version. Because I thought of a way, I can't remember who it was, but somebody asked me if I was going to create the full body of this dragon when I did my last live feed about this. And I said, I had intended to, but as it turns out, there wasn't a whole lot of space and I wasn't sure how to make it work. Well, I went to sleep that night and I had a brilliant idea of how I could do segments of a body and present them in the large version of the exhibit. So I will be working on that. So stay tuned, and I'll share that idea with you eventually once I get done with this. So that's sort of how this thing came to be. I actually did a very, very similar traveling exhibit last summer and fall that was based on Star Wars, called The Zoology of Star Wars. And, that's where the idea of bringing large-sized exhibit pieces or show pieces on the road sort of arose, is I really, really wanted to bring something to these areas that I visit that really resembled a museum experience or, something that people just don't see very often. So in this case, I was sort of borrowing somebody else's idea, in this case, George Lucas, and I was talking about the fictional animals from his world, and I built life-size replicas of those animals and compared them to our zoological and paleontological specimens from the museum, and it was pretty successful. The things that I would do differently now is I don't want to necessarily use somebody else's intellectual property. So in this case, I wanted to create all of our own product. And, in the case of the Star Wars thing, I was using models and toys of some of the creatures because, it's pretty much, it's very difficult, I've learned, to replicate Lucasfilm creatures with a small budget and not a lot of time to spend on it. So I thought I did really well with what I had, but I thought if I was going to repeat this again and take this idea even further, I wanted to do it with original material, I guess, instead of playing in somebody else's sandbox. So that's why we chose mythological creatures. Is there are a lot of different interpretations of mythological creatures, and so there's a lot of room to sort of create our own spin on this stuff and not necessarily worry about stealing somebody else's creative property. So that's why I kind of went this route. So you can see I'm kind of working on adding the details for his lip. I will definitely probably add more colors. I will add a little bit of gold to that. But for now, I'm going to switch tasks here in just a second and move on to sort of my next thing on my to-do list for adding detail to this critter. And if I can get my computer to work, it went to sleep on me because it does that. So let's see here. All right, so, oh, it didn't. My computer will not cooperate with me. Hang on just a second. I have to remember my password and type with one word. There we go. So this is my reference picture. And what I'm interested in right now is that. So what that is a tympanic membrane or tympanium of it looks like a bearded dragon in this case, or maybe an iguana. Can't tell if that's a beardy. I think it's an iguana now that I look at it. But I'm trying to come up with a way to, okay, I want to make this tympanic membrane look like that. So, oh, where did it go? There we go. So that's what I'm shooting for. And, you want to add as many details as possible, as reasonable, I guess. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my high-tech Model Magic material here. And I am actually going to roll it into a very thin sort of rope-like texture or shape. And hang on just a second here. Let me figure out how to use both of my hands. There we go. So what I'm going to do is basically thin this out as much as possible. And what I want to do is sort of create a ring around where that tympanic membrane is going to be. So that's what I'm shooting for now, is this is going to be sort of the fleshy ring around the tympanic membrane, or the ear of the dragon. And you'd be surprised how hard it is to find good images of lizard ears and lizard lips. I have a lot of respect for paleo artists and wildlife artists who have to reconstruct some of these animals for museums and places like Disney parks and zoos and stuff like that, because it's not easy to find ways to create realistic looking structures, and it's even harder to find good references for them. So what I'm going to do is flip back over so you can kind of see what I'm doing. So I'm going to sort of line this up. And again, I'm probably going to have to glue this down. Now, what I've got to figure out is, so what I just did is this outer rim right here of the tympanium or ear. And then I've got to figure out what that structure is in there. And I might have to go find an actual living reptile and look closely at their ears and see what that structure actually looks like. So what I'm going to do is glue this down, and then I will add similar texture, just like I did with the eyes and the lips, and I will add that inner structure for the inside of the ear. So that is progress so far on our terrestrial dragon for the exhibit that will be called, or the traveling education program called From Mythology to Paleontology. So eventually I will finish this guy up, and then we will start on our subterranean dragon, which is in the very, very early stages. So hopefully, if there's interest, I will start from an early stage and sort of show how I get from that stage of starting out with a chunk of foam, a lot like this, to this. So I'm not going to make you stare at me painting and gluing and talking to myself much longer. But if there are questions, feel free to send them in the text boxes or the message boxes, and I will do my best to answer them. Or if you've got suggestions or questions or criticisms or anything else, we are listening. So until tomorrow, when we check in with you in the morning at the museum, and I will likely either be here or working in the workshop at the museum on these exhibit pieces, I will see you tomorrow. And as always, please like and share our live feeds. We're always open to comments and pointers and questions. So if you've got any, feel free to leave them in the comments area. And I will see you tomorrow. Hope everybody is healthy and happy and safe, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.